seated for our audience in person. So the question is, why are we here today? Every year, in the month of March, intellectual disability awareness is celebrated, and we're doing it just the same here in Jamaica. And when we look at the statistics, we see why it is so important for us to have awareness around intellectual disabilities. So in regards to the Jamaica Survey of Living Conditions, the 2014 data set, they would have noted that of the persons identified as having a disability, 15.2% of those individuals had an intellectual disability. The Jamaica Council for Persons with Disability Registry would have noted that of the persons registered with them, 18.6% of those persons had an intellectual disability. And in 2018-19, when the Ministry of Education would have had their own baseline survey as to the number of students who had disabilities, 24% of our students would have been identified as having a form of intellectual disability, ranging from mild to moderate to severe or profound intellectual disability. So you see why it is so important for us to have this awareness forum, but not just a forum, which is a one-off event, but just this continued conversation as well as meaningful intervention, impactful intervention as we combat and manage intellectual disabilities. So at this time, I would like to invite from the Digicel Foundation, which is our primary partner today, Ms. Jade McFarlane, Senior Operations Manager, who will bring greetings. Please make her welcome.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Dr. Joan Reed, President Council of Management of Jade, Mrs. Marilyn McCoy, Executive Director of Jade, Safri Bound of the PSOJ Project Star, members, presenters, and guests, and those joining us online, good morning. It is undoubtedly an honor to be representing the Digicel Foundation here and to reiterate the Foundation's total and unwavering support to the absolutely vital work that Jade has been doing in pursuit of a better Jamaica for almost 70 years now. So much of what has been achieved today for over that period is embodied in the theme today's forum. In enabling our brothers and sisters with challenges to contribute to society and to live meaningfully with dignity, we are removing barriers to our collective progress, and the more we view our differently abled citizens as fellow Jamaicans is the more we are all enriched. The journey of Jade over the years, over the 7 decades, has been a study in leadership, as exemplified by the executive director and every member of the team, as well as consistent advocacy that led to the signing of the Innovative Approaches Technical Cooperation Agreement that provides sustainable care to differently abled children. And of course, it is all about partnership that we at Digicel Foundation have built and sustained with Jade since 2012 through our groundbreaking night 5K run, walk, and wheel. We have always been inspired by the resilience, creativity, and spirit of our differently abled community. And we share in the sense of accomplishment in having been able to support not just physical infrastructure, such as learning and recreational centers, but programs to foster entrepreneurship and impart skills that will serve the community for generations and also redound to the benefit of our beloved country. I'd also like to acknowledge on this occasion our new partners in the presence of the private sector organization of Jamaica, and in particular, Project Star. We look forward to your input and collaboration, for indeed, we need even more interventions and greater involvement if we are to realize the dream of a barrier-free community. And we recognize that the oft-hidden internal barriers are more of a challenge than the physical ones. But if the resolve and bright spirits that we admire within the community are to be meaningful, then we should at least emulate those qualities, renew our commitment to the goals, and intensify the efforts that have yielded good results that we recognize today. On that score, I leave you today with a reminder from Helen Keller, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit. The person who is consistent with what has already been done is an obstacle to further progress. Let us all continue to be channels and not obstacles. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. McFarlane. Let us all continue to be channels and not obstacles. I think that's very important when we consider the context of our conversation here this morning, which is leadership, advocacy, and partnerships. And if we want to ensure there's accessibility for all the persons living with disabilities, particularly those with intellectual disabilities, we have to ensure that we're creating channels and not creating obstacles for those individuals. Thank you again, Ms. McFarlane. And of course, thank you to the Digicel Foundation, who have remained a partner to this cause. So, I would like to ask a question to my audience here in person. And for those online, if you'd want to drop it in the chat as well, we'll definitely look out for it and engage with it there. So I would like to ask, what is the color that is used for this month, for Intellectual Disability Awareness Month? What is the color? And the color is very much here in the room. It is, the color is on me. You sure it's blue? I know we have a lot of blue. I don't think it's blue. Orange is the color, I was told. Orange is the color. Okay, I want to confirm, we were correct, right, Gavin? Yes, very good. So the color that we use for Intellectual Disability Awareness Month is orange. And I really hope that we'd have been wearing our orange for the month. Yes? Or orange ribbons, etc. Yes, very good. So at this time, I'm going to invite the person next who's supposed to bring greetings, which is, which is Ms. Marilyn McCaw, Executive Director of the Jamaican Association of Intellectual Disabilities. Please make her welcome.
Madam Moderator, Dr. Joan Reed, President of Jade, and other directors here in the room and online, Ms. Jodianne McFarlane, Senior Operations Manager, Digicel Foundation, other presenters here in the room and online, or other guests, educators, parents, children, and adults with intellectual disabilities. Good morning and welcome. This forum is specifically focused on persons with intellectual disability. This space is being used to celebrate them and to provide the opportunity for self-advocates to speak up while exploring possible solutions to address the barriers persons face in their efforts to connect with their communities. In 2010, Jade hosted its first forum in partnership with Jamaica Special Olympics Jamaica and Jamaica Red Cross. This year's forum is being facilitated in partnership with Digicel Foundation. Digicel Foundation has significantly contributed to the development of infrastructure to improve the access to school placement and support to Jade's social enterprises which engage adults. Intellectual disability is being described as a lifelong condition that is characterized by limitations in the person's ability to learn, reason, and perform independent living skills in ways expected by the environment, hence the need for support. Disability inclusion requires the removal of unnecessary barriers and the provision of assistance to enable persons with intellectual disability to integrate fully in society. Barriers, of course, can be personal and they can be external. Some personal barriers include the inability to express themselves and the needs and their particular needs, limited education, fear or lack of confidence, and challenging behaviors that they exhibited. Some of the external barriers are stereotyping, stigma, prejudice, and discrimination, all of which are attitude barriers. Others include complex systems that we navigate every day, information presented in formats that persons with ID cannot read or understand, ignorance, limited access to services, key services, complex language, and limited opportunities to engage in employment and social and leisure activities. At the end of this conversation today, persons with intellectual disability and their families are more interested in the action, the programs that will be implemented, the opportunities that will be provided, and equitable access to services. Only then will they truly experience the reality of the theme for this month, Intellectual Disability Awareness Month 2023, beyond the conversations. Let us keep the conversation going as we all play our part in helping to create new pathways, identify and implement solutions that will remove the barriers and make communities accessible and inclusive to persons with intellectual disability. I wish for you an engaging and solution-driven discourse. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you so much, Ms. McCoy, Executive Director of Jade. And I love how she ended it, that we'll be having a solutions-driven conversation, because we don't just want to focus on the challenges. We're aware that there are many challenges, there are many barriers, but how can we create those channels that we talked about earlier so we may combat those barriers? Thank you again, Ms. McCoy. At this time, we'll have a video presentation. It is a part of a video series titled Allow Me, which showcased testimonials from persons with intellectual disabilities who are engaged in community living as well as their lived life experiences. This initiative is in collaboration with the Carberry Court Special School and Community-Based Rehabilitation Jamaica, and the video is expected to be launched soon. We will now take a look at the video presentation.
Hi, my name is William Lewis. I am the coffee farmer. I work every day. I water the young coffee. I weed the young coffee. I prune the big coffee. I read on the ripe coffee. I work for 6 years. I love my work. I am the best coffee farmer. If I don't understand about the work, my boss explains to me. I want to work for a long time, so allow me.
My name is Mario Alfred. I like taking bus among us from the haircut. I like use my bus card when I take bus. I like my life.
My name is Nigel Davis. I working with Parang for 18 years now, and I start off in the packaging area first, then I go to soap press. Right now I'm making the soaps. I'm the soap miller and the soap extruder. What I love about Parang, also they have someone to help you around when you don't really understand. As I am working, I help my mom with the bills, and she's proud of me. Thank you, Parang. You allow me to work.
My name is Shamina Mackenzie. I go to the clinic in my area to do a checkup to see if my body is running right. Also, I admit in the hospital to have my son. My son is 5 years old and I love him so much. The first time when I go to the clinic with my mom told the doctor that I have a disability. When I went by myself, I did not understand. They explained it to me well. Now I'm not afraid to go to the hospital. These are
I love sports. Special Olympics allow me to play different sports and travel around the world. Sports keep me fit and make me meet new people. I help the youths in my community to learn the sports what I love. So allow them.
So today I want to share my story about living with siblings with learning disabilities, as we call it then, but now we call it intellectual disabilities, or their slow cognitive development. So I'm from a family of 7 parents. Both of them were educators, now retired, and I had 2 sisters, still have 2 sisters, and 2 brothers, twins. The twins were the last, and as they grew, we realized that they were not progressing as they should have. And it turned out that they were diagnosed through an assessment at Michael Care with having what we call then a learning disability. The easiest part of getting over this challenge is really accepting the results, accepting the fact that an assessment by professionals says that these persons will be learning at a slower pace. It's never easy to accept that, especially when all the siblings that went ahead, were basically progressing well through school and so on. But as a family, we agreed and we decided that this was what the journey was going to be like. And so my mom very early took the decision that
All right, thank you. So that was the Allow Me video. Let's give a round of applause, please. So I love the different aspects that were highlighted. And one of the things that I want to mention is that aside from access to education, access to employment, we want to also ensure that persons with intellectual disabilities have access to social activities. A lot of the time we focus on just, okay, let's try to get them educated where possible, so to get them employed. But what about just to be able to just have a good life, to enjoy, to go out, to, as one gentleman said, to play football in his community? That's also important. So when we think about the development and the access, it must be at 360 degrees, the full development, the social, the education, the ability to work, the ability to have friends, the ability to laugh, to enjoy themselves. So I think it's a very, I would like to say that the title used, it's very appropriate. Allow me to experience life as normal as possible have access as possible and to support me as best as possible. I think the team has done a great job with the video. I think we should give another round of applause, please. And I look forward to it being shared on the different channels. So I would like to invite, and I think it's my little sister because we both have the same last name, Shaniel Williams from the Windsor School of Special Education. She will be performing for us. Please make her welcome.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
How are you today?
Fine, thank you.
Okay, good to hear. Me a Fear Pitney by Miss Campbell. Teach me, train me, care me, and love me. After all, me a fear pitney, no bother rough me up and treat me badly. Just remember, say, me a fear pitney. Teach me, train me, care me, and love me. After all, me a fear pitney, no bother rough me up and treat me badly. Just remember, say, me a fear pitney. Mommy, daddy, me love you, see? Thank you enough for treat me nicely. Thank you enough for keep me healthy. Thank you enough for understand me. After all, me a fear pitney. After all, me a fear pitney. Yes, me special, a God make me. We no secret have a disability. We no secret have a disability. We no secret have a disability. Handicap. No call me no name. Me no like.
You're ready.
Okay. Me a fear pitney by Miss Campbell. Teach me, train me, care me, and love me. After all, me a fear pitney, no bother rough me up and treat me badly. Just remember, say, me a fear pitney. Teach me, train me, care me, and love me. After all, me a fear pitney, no bother rough me up and treat me badly. Just remember, say, me a fear pitney. Mommy, daddy, me love you, see? Thank you enough for treat me nicely. Thank you enough for keep me healthy. Thank you enough for understand me. After all, me a fear pitney. After all, me a fear pitney. Yes, me special, a God make me. We no secret have a disability. We no secret have a disability. We no secret have a disability. Handicap. No call me no name. Me no like it. Me for respect you. You for respect me. After all, me a fear pitney. Teach me, train me, care me, and love me. After all, me a fear pitney. After all, me a fear pitney. After all, me a fear pitney.
Woo! Thank you so much, Shaniel. After all, me a fear pitney. That was I think it was quite appropriate for this setting. Thank you so much. And you said Miss Campbell is the writer. Wherever Miss Campbell is, we want to big up Miss Campbell. Oh, she's right there. Okay. Her teacher. Or at our former school. Okay. Well, wherever Miss Campbell is, we also want to thank her because there's obviously been some kind of engagement and investment here. So we thank Miss Campbell as well. So we are getting right into our panel discussion. But just before I do that, I would like to create a little bit of context as to why are we focusing on this theme of creating barrier-free communities through leadership, advocacy, and partnership. So when we consider partnerships, leadership, and advocacy for persons with intellectual disabilities, it's about how we can promote greater inclusion and accessibility. Partnerships between community, organizations, business, and government agencies can help to coordinate efforts and resources to address the needs of persons with intellectual disabilities. Now, when we consider leadership by persons with intellectual disabilities, it plays an important role as it allows them to advocate for their own needs and promote greater awareness and understanding of their roles and abilities. As we like to say, nothing for us without us. These persons should also be able to advocate for themselves. And finally, advocacy efforts by individuals and organizations can work to promote policies and legislation that create more inclusive and accessible communities. Together, these approaches can help to break down barriers and create a more welcoming and supportive environment for people with intellectual disabilities. And it's through this context that we'll be having our panel discussion this morning. So we are joined by Dr. Joan Reed, President of the Council of Management for the Jamaica Association of Intellectual Disabilities. I want to give them a nice little wave, Dr. Reed. And she will be focusing on leadership on our panel this morning. For partnership, we have Ms. Safra Bond, Project Director from Project STAR, Private Sector Organization of Jamaica. And she already waved already. We're clapping. And then joining us online is Miss Carla Moore, advocate and lecturer from the University of the West Indies. And I hope she doesn't mind, but she actually celebrated her birthday yesterday. So happy birthday, happy belated birthday, Miss Carla Moore. And she's joining us online, and she will be speaking about advocacy. So Dr. Joan Reed will be speaking about leadership, Ms. Carla Moore speaking about advocacy, and Ms. Safra Brown will be speaking on partnerships. And we're ready, panelists? Yes. And we're ready online? Yes. Ms. Moore is ready online. So we'll begin with advocacy. And of course, Ms. Carla Moore will be the first one to answer this question, which is, how can we prepare young adults to become self-advocates with intellectual disabilities, and how can the community accommodate them? So we want them to become advocates for themselves. How can we allow them to do this, and how can we support them as a community?
Yeah, thanks so much for that question. And since I'm the first person that's speaking on the panel, I want to thank you all for putting this event together and for the work that you're doing in the field. I think for me personally, being invited to be a speaker here forced me to extend the boundaries of how I considered advocacy or who I considered an advocate. And I think that has been something that's been useful to me, and I'll take it forward. So self-advocacy is, and these are the words of Jackie Downer, self-advocacy is one of the most important ways in which people with intellectual disabilities have a voice of their own. So self-advocacy refers to the processes through which people with intellectual disabilities are able to fully participate. And when we say fully participate, a lot of times when we think about advocacy, we think broad level, which is policy, we're thinking about, okay, legislation, all of those things. But when I'm talking about self-advocacy here, I'm talking about advocacy that is going to create full inclusion in families, communities, and also in their own lives. Now, I get the impression that I froze, and I need to know if that was a fact. Did I freeze? Okay, it seems I didn't freeze, so we're fine. All right, so self-advocacy refers to those sets of processes, and self-advocacy is extremely important because one, self-advocacy is one of the ways that people with intellectual disabilities can speak for themselves. Using a term like speak for themselves can be a bit complicated when we're referring to intellectual disabilities, because some people with intellectual disabilities are nonverbal. So it's one of the ways that they can actually communicate their needs, communicate their preferences, demand that they be listened to, because we live in societies that by and large like to take people with disabilities, including intellectual disabilities, and kind of just push them off to the side and ignore them. They can also affirm their right to whole life experiences. For me, this is one of the aspects of self-advocacy that's so key and so important. The ability to say, yes, I agree with that. No, I don't disagree with that. This is actually my preference in terms of my room color, the outfit that I'm going to put on, the food that I'm going to eat. They can also make it clear that they are capable of thinking for themselves, because a lot of times persons with intellectual disabilities because they develop at different rates and because they might communicate in different ways, people have the idea that they're incapable of thinking at all. They're incapable of articulating an opinion on their own. Self-advocacy is going to interrupt that. Self-advocacy is going to make a lot of people very confused and uncomfortable, and that's fine, because sometimes people are confused and uncomfortable, right? Especially if it's for the greater good. So my thing is this: I feel the first thing that we can do when it comes down to self-advocacy is we have to create the environment for self-advocacy. We have to create the response and supportive environment. And when I'm talking about we, I'm talking about, to start, the organizations who are working with people with intellectual disabilities, the allies, the sisters and the brothers and the mothers and the fathers have to create that environment where the person with the intellectual disability understands that they even have a right to advocate for themselves, that they have the support if they decide to advocate for themselves. This means we have to get very clear on the type of support that they need, right? And this means communicating with them, finding out, observing, learning, looking at other self-advocacy projects, doing that research. We also have to address our own biases that stand in the way of people being able to advocate for themselves. One bias, which is in Jamaica, we love to talk about how people too high. We love to talk about how beggars are not choosers. You can let me know if any of this resonates with you. You're too hype and beggars can't be choosers. A lot of times, people who come from marginalized groups, we treat them like beggars. So when they decide that they're going to ask for exactly what they need, there's a part of us that bristles against it, because how dare you ask for so much? No, the days of living on the crumbs of society are done. We're done with that, right? So it's about addressing our own biases and figuring out what type of support they need. It's also figuring out how to be an ally and how to be a support person. It's your voice that matters. I am just here to help you get your voice out. I am here to maybe break down some big concepts for you. I am here to maybe facilitate a conversation because you're nonverbal and this decision maker wants your opinion. Like, it's about really getting clear on the fact that you are the one at the front and I am here to support you. The other way that we need to prepare people for self-advocacy is to prepare the advocate themselves. I went back and forth with myself on where to start this, because you always want the community to lead. You must ask the community what they want, right? As it was said before, nothing for us without us. But I have found that when you are working with communities that have historically been excluded, they can be hesitant to ask for anything because they have been shut down so often. They can be hesitant to ask for anything because they don't even know that they're entitled to these things. They can be hesitant to ask for anything because they feel like they're living on other people's grace and they don't want to rock the boat. They can be hesitant to ask for anything because they're not even aware that this is a possibility for them. They never thought about what they want. They've only been able to consider what they need. And they've already accepted that they're not going to get the majority of what they need. So I would start with some deep self-empowerment work here. Radical, honest self-empowerment work that asks the young advocate to look at themselves, or the advocate, regardless of age, to look at themselves and go, okay, what are my strengths? What are my challenges? What do I need in order to overcome those challenges? When an advocate starts asking themselves questions like that, the advocacy asks start popping up. What do I need to overcome those challenges? Well, this is where you're going to start to see the gaps in what's available to you, right? What does a fulfilling life feel like for me? This question frightens people. I'm a life coach, and even when I'm doing life coaching, this question frightens people, because when I say to them, what does a fulfilling life feel like for you? Them start telling me some little small up things, and I say, no, go bigger, 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 bigger. What does your most fulfilling life feel like? And these are the questions we need to ask people with intellectual disabilities. What does a good life feel like for you? And then based on that, we know what we need to do, right? So there's that. That's the work with the person. Then we need to do the work around just building advocacy skills. So breaking down advocacy. Why is advocacy important? What are some of the steps that you need to take in advocacy, and develop an advocacy plan? Who do you need to advocate to? Decision makers, community leaders, right? Friends and family. What has been your journey and what do you bring to advocacy, right? Based on your experiences, how does your intellectual disability put you in an ideal position to be an advocate? How do your experiences with having a family that celebrated you, also encountering people that discriminated against you, how do those things add richness to your work as an advocate, and how can you apply them, right? And then, what can I do to get what I need? Ask themselves that question. What can I do to get what I need, and whose support is necessary in order to get what I need? And I think these are the types of questions, and this is the type of work that has to go into self-advocacy for people with intellectual disabilities. Sending people out to be advocates without building their confidence in themselves and their awareness that they have a voice and they have a right to a voice, we're setting ourselves up for failure. And we, as the people who are doing the supporting, if we don't really get clear on what our role is and the fact that our role is to be here, not here, here, then we're also setting ourselves up for failure when it comes down to self-advocacy. So yeah, that's what I want to share in terms of my response to that question.
Thank you so much, Ms. Moore, and I think she has really helped in setting the pace of where we need to go. There's this term persons like to use. They like to say, I am the voice for the voiceless. But I think based on what Ms. Moore is saying, we should actually do away with that as much as possible. We should empower those who are traditionally voiceless to become a voice for themselves and for others in their communities. So it's important that we have persons who are creating an environment that persons with intellectual disabilities feel empowered enough to advocate for themselves. And as she said, to know what their best self look like, to ask them these questions that they may then be able to work with these different supporting organizations to create that best self or that best life that they would want. And it takes me into this question to Dr. Reed, which is, what kind of influence should different stakeholders, such as parents and families, create if they want to have this barrier-free community for persons with intellectual disabilities?
This is a good way to segue into that. And coming out of advocacy, Daniel did something for us. And not only Daniel, but William, Nigel, Miss Mackenzie, and the others. I want to use this opportunity because I am hearing Daniel speaking, and she just performed. And in order for us to get into what leadership should be, I would like to invite Daniel up here.
All right.
Chanel, please come. Right here, quickly, we're looking at leadership. Where does it begin? Does it begin externally or is it internally?
Right, with the community.
You are supposed to be your own advocate. Daniel, let me ask you. I am so sorry, my apologies. Chanel, what did she say earlier? We want to find out from you how you feel about you and what you think is your best self.
Okay, I'm a talented young lady, so I think that is my best self.
What do you like best of all?
Like playing drum and say poems and acting, dance, post videos on TikToks and
Tell us what you have been doing with TikTok.
Post dancing videos and do acting sometimes and talk about things, like speak about facts.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what has that done for you?
Well, it gives me a lot of views and I get a lot of likes on my videos normally.
Any money?
Yes.
You don't tell us how much. Well, but this is an advocate, and so don't move yet. And so, as she performed earlier, she made mention of the word handicap. And this is a term that society has used because people are not handicapped. It is what society has done, or it is the barriers placed in your way that create the handicap for the persons. So any one of us can be handicapped. So Chanel, this is a word we should not be using, and I want to thank you for that. Now, leadership comes also from home. Chanel's mother is in the audience, and I want to give kudos to her as well.
Round of applause for
that's
mommy.
where leadership begins. And where it begins for persons who have disabilities, any kind at all. And today, while we are looking at intellectual disabilities, and by the way, it's intellectual disabilities, it's not learning disabilities. Learning disabilities is something else. So you don't leave from LD, learning disability, to ID, intellectual disability. When you have an intellectual disability, you're behind by at least 2 years intellectually, 2 years socially, and 2 years socially, intellectually, and academically. So it means your academic work is way behind what it should be. Your social work, how you operate and engage in society, are you able to purchase what you want, make correct change, have a reasonable conversation? All those things are important, and those are social skills that we speak about, and those are necessary for persons with intellectual disability. Now, when you're socialized in a home with a mother who understands that you need all these attributes to use socially and to take you to school and to allow you to get an education and to learn to your maximum extent, and then at school, the next tier of leadership is the teachers. What did the teachers do? They recognized what was required. And so Daniel's talent was...
Chanel.
Chanel, charge me each time I call you Daniel.
Call it again.
Yes. So at school now, the teachers must recognize what's necessary, what's required, identify the talent, and put it to use. This is what Chanel has been doing. And I want you to know that the other persons, Daniel, William, Nigel, look at what happened. One knew that he's a good coffee farmer. When he didn't understand what to do, leadership is there. They didn't throw him out and evaluate him and give him a 0. He is encouraged. This is leadership. And so we need to pay attention to these little things, because leadership is required from the home, from the persons themselves, through advocacy, all the way up now to our organization. So I would ask you, who are we dealing with? Persons with intellectual disabilities. Who is involved? Parents, teachers, caregivers, and all of us who are here today. Who is responsible? It's everyone, all of us. Who should tell them? Chanel, who should tell them?
Me.
Yes.
Me.
You should tell them, and all of us. And isn't that what we are doing here? This is another tier of leadership that is required. And so, who should tell them? It's us. Where do we begin? Where do we start? We started before, right? John Golding, Randolph Lopez. We have Sir John Golding Center, which is up the road from us. They have also started because they're dealing with some students with intellectual challenges. But we started with Randolph Lopez. Here we are, 67 years on. That's leadership. 5 schools, almost 2,000 students. We need to tell everybody, but that's not enough. We now need legislation, Ms. Jackson. That's where we are at. This is now the role of the Ministry of Education. This is where they come in. We now have the Disability Act of 2014 Have you read it? Do you know what is in there? That's leadership for you. That is setting the stage for us to determine, based on what the needs are, that these needs are being met and they are placed in their rightful positions and they are not walked over, whether or not they can explain themselves or not. And by the way, persons with intellectual disabilities range from profound to severe, and that's those who are unable to understand, to speak for themselves, to even be able to count and tie their shoelaces. We have that level. But then we have those like Chanel, who is quite expressive, as we have heard her. And so we need to look at the leadership level, look at what's in there for all of us and for the students that we are advocating for. Am I leading aright? Is leadership taking shape? Has the ministry done what it should? If not, that's where our advocacy need to go. So, I will stop there for a while.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Reed.
Thank you.
Oh, one more.
To share a TikTok handle.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, guys, I have a lot of TikTok pages, but some of them, I don't really use them, but I mostly use the one with the most followers. Okay, I'm going to give you 2 of them, or 3 of them. All right. The one with...
That's leadership.
Right. Okay, the one with the most followers is Chanel Williams 346.
So that's Chanel Williams 346.
With the most followers.
Oh, those online, you're taking down her pages, so you may engage.
Okay. Another one is, with the second most followers, is Chanel 366. Yeah. SHENEEL. Yeah. Okay. Yes. The third one is Shanika. Again.
All right, you give us that after.
Oh no, Shanika 3198.
All right.
Yeah.
So that's Shanika 3198.
Yeah. I also have a YouTube channel. I'm really struggling on it. Yeah.
But we were gonna get you some viewership. What's the YouTube channel's name?
Chanel 346.
Chanel 346. All right. Thank you so much, Chanel.
That's leadership for you.
Right.
Please to subscribe and to watch my videos, and you can share it to your friends, and please remember to turn on the post notification bell once you're new.
All right.
Okay,
I love it to know because she knows about it much more than I do. All right.
That's her. Oh.
Yes. Thank you so much. Another round of applause, please. And I know we are committed here to share her pages and to engage. As she said, turn on the post notifications and subscribe. All right. So we talked about parents as stakeholders. We talked about teachers. We talked about self-advocacy. But Ms. Brown, what about the business community? How through CSR can they engage persons with intellectual disabilities, whether for employment or social recreation?
Yeah. So it's a good question. It's important to note that Jamaican communities, in my experience, are very civic-minded and aim to be really good corporate citizens. Most companies in Jamaica have a value statement, a mission statement, a sort of guiding principles that identify what kind of corporate citizen they want to be, what kind of employer they want to be, what they want to be able to provide to their customers. And I think there are lots of opportunities to kind of anchor your mission and the mission of the organization and within some of these areas that the companies really focus on. Ms. Moore spoke about it in terms of self-advocacy, and then we talk about leadership. And so, therefore, what we need to make sure is within these companies, aligned to these companies, are advocates who are communicating and sharing what's happening, sort of advocating for what kind of enabling environment is needed. And then when we look at leadership within the companies, we're not necessarily talking about leadership as in the CEO. We're really talking about people, whether it's customers, whether it's staff, within the companies, who it's an important subject that needs to be addressed, and they're able to really go in and lead the charge, so to speak, on really trying to get the company to identify that creating an enabling environment for intellectual disability specifically is an important area of what they should be doing, especially as it relates to diversity and inclusion. And again, when we talk about inclusion, lots of companies have inclusion statements. Inclusion statements in and of themselves are supposed to take into account everybody. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they have targeted approaches for people living with intellectual disabilities. And so therefore, this is where the advocacy and the leadership matters. I think companies in Jamaica, this sort of thing does matter, creating an enabling environment, but a lot of it has to do with lack of knowledge, lack of focus. And so I think if we can really work on that, if we can work on asking companies if JAID can come in and just do talks with staff, make presentations to HR departments, and really just start, as you say, in terms of educating, you find that I think that they will very much get involved. In terms of knowledge, it's interesting because, you know, we do a lot of work in communities, Project STAR. You know, we had a town hall meeting yesterday in East Queen Street, and one of the things that I'd mentioned that had actually been raised by parents, and these are just parents that want to help their children, is they're saying, you know, even those of us parents who want to help our children, we don't know how. We don't know what the resources are, where we can go for help, what kind of help our children need. And so if we apply that generally to any grouping that doesn't understand the needs of another group, then what we have to do, those of us who do understand, we have to kind of signpost. Some companies need to be signposted as well, and I think that's a reality that we have to factor. But I do think we recognize very much that the companies have really looked to create a process of inclusion. And training is absolutely key, and not a one-off training, right? One-off training is very important as a sort of introductory, but ongoing training. And this also has to do within companies, just in terms of communication, conflict resolution, managing expectations, you know, and this sort of kindness that people show between their colleagues that maybe behave a little differently or respond a little differently, as a sort of ecosystem for how we treat each other. And I think it's interesting because in doing the sort of research for today, a lot of the principles about what's needed by people with intellectual disabilities have to do generally with the principles of kindness and humanity, and a willingness to allow everybody to operate with respect within an ecosystem where everybody matters and everybody is heard, which again, is interesting, is an ethos of Project STAR. Somebody mentioned the whole idea about, you know, hierarchy and sort of, you know, sort of having different sort of levels or achievements and these sorts of things. Our mantra is everybody forward, because we're all on a level playing field. This is how we see we're all on the same playing field, and what we need to do is be moving forward together. We're at different stages of that, right? But it is about propelling forward rather than a sort of up and down, and we need to move away from that idea, because that idea of up and down is an idea of better than, more valued than, more important than. And we need to move away with those ideas. And I think if we move away with those ideas, we can also create an ecosystem where it doesn't matter whether it's intellectual disabilities, physical disabilities, issues around poverty, issues around early parenting, issues about, it doesn't matter what it is more about a principle of humanity and treatment. And I think that companies very much will ascribe to that. And also, I think that, you know, we have a situation in Jamaica where we have a lot of jobs available, and we have sort of, you know, I think we're at 6% unemployment. This means that companies are really trying to attract people to work. They need to attract everybody involved within our human capital ecosystem, and that includes people with intellectual disabilities. And so now is the time for companies to really create space so that people involved, people with intellectual disabilities can work and access employment. A number of years ago, we'd worked on a project, a lot of work around social entrepreneurship, right? And what was really exciting about the social entrepreneurship ecosystem is that we did a sort of incubator program. 25% of the social enterprises we worked with were run by people living with different forms of disabilities, because social entrepreneurship of itself is an inclusive model. But what it showed was that whole sort of percentage of our population that, again, we don't ascribe any real kind of ability to contribute to our sort of economic development, what the social enterprise movement showed is actually, they can contribute, they can be part of our human capital, they can be part of our economic development. And so if you create an inclusive ecosystem, then you'll find that you're able to open up your human capital. And I think that's an important component, and I think that companies are going to have to respond to that. I think now is the right time for organizations like JID to really advocate for employment as a key component, especially considering where we are now in terms of needing employment. And I think that you'll find that companies are responsive. I would definitely be utilizing an organization like the Private Sector Organization of Jamaica to help put together forums, to help put together that kind of information. And JID could really act as a service provider in terms of information, in terms of knowledge, in terms of signposting, toolkits, and so on and so forth. Training, huge one. And again, companies, I think, would be very responsive to that. So I think this is all kind of, in a nutshell where we are. I think there are huge opportunities. And I think that you have a private sector that is ready and willing to be open to what is you need. Once we have the self-advocates, the advocates, the internal leadership, the external leadership, the institutional leadership, I think now is a good time to really push forth.
I agree, and I think that's a call to action, in fact. I would like to challenge Dr. Reed beside me here and Madam Edie, Ms. McCoy there, to say how it is that maybe after this you could think about some kind of MOU between PSOJ about some targeted approaches, I like that word that you use, to work with different private sector organizations in ensuring that they have the environment needed for persons with intellectual disabilities and across the board, because we want it to be truly inclusive for all.
Just to do another pitch, so JID is a member of the Council of Voluntary Social Services, which is a member of PSOJ. Right. And so through your membership with CVSS, you can advocate directly to the PSOJ.
Perfect, perfect.
We do have a transition department, and this is an area we can work through. And if you speak with Mr. Ferguson, our development officer, there are projects that we are engaged in, as you spoke about entrepreneurial skills and social entrepreneurship. These are areas that we can look at: agriculture, horticulture, and there were many other enterprises that we had to stop working on because of COVID, so we could re-engage in those areas because those are profitable areas. And as I heard about our shortage of skills, I am not sure, because our clients can get jobs out there. I have 2 at my workplace, and they are doing wonderfully well. Persons are saying, we want to work with them. They understand what they're doing. We have never seen the place looking like this. This is a testimony to what we're doing, and we should do some more of that.
Very good, very good. I love that. So we're going to go back to Ms. Moore. We talked about business just now, but what's about government? What can government do, whether through its different policies and programs, to support the different advocacy efforts, whether it's self-advocacy or advocacy of organizations? What can government do through what can government do, whether through policy or programming?
Yes, great question. And I think that both Ms. Brown and Dr. Reed have kind of signposted some things that we can look towards. So an important thing is to use what we already have. So Jamaica is a signatory to the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. I believe that we have also ratified it. And by virtue of doing that, there are a number of commitments we have made to promote and protect the rights of persons living with disabilities, including persons living with intellectual disabilities. So and the government is doing things. So for instance, we have the Disabilities Act that has come in, and that would have come out of the thinking inside of this convention. So it's really, what do we have and how can we start to apply it? Application, right? I think that one thing that the government can do is to share government platforms across the board, their communication platforms, their social media pages. I think we can all agree that many of our government ministers have fantastic social media pages. Share it with people living with intellectual disabilities so that the rest of the country can get an idea of what we're actually referring to. Because intellectual disabilities have been stigmatized so much, a lot of people with intellectual disabilities have not been allowed much public space. So there's a lot of misconception about what it means and what it looks like and what people are capable of and what accommodation they might need, right? So we can start to do this work. And this is a phrase that I think it's E for Life that uses this phrase. They said that we want to start changing hearts and minds. We want to start changing hearts and minds. Let's start changing some hearts and minds about intellectual disabilities. I think we also have to have some culturally specific conversations that the government could take the lead on around what intellectual disability means. There is still that sentiment that, oh, it's obia, cause it. There is still this sentiment that, oh, it's some sin in the family, cause the person to have the disability. It's curse, the person curse that cause it. And I think the government, and they can do this in conjunction with, you know, the university who has people who are doing academic type work around this. They can do this in conjunction with community leaders who have experience on the ground, you know, bring this conversation from many angles so we can tap into that thing. We can't ignore it. We can't overlook it. We cannot overlook it because it's uncomfortable to address how many people think is obvious cause intellectual disabilities. The government have to take the lead and going straight to it. I also think that we're still at a place that when we think about disability, we think about physical disability. When we think about accommodation, we think about make sure say you have a ramp at the health center, those types of things. So we really need to, in a meaningful way, the government needs to integrate a focus on intellectual disabilities into their media campaigns, into whatever it's the work that they're doing around disability. We need funding. You know, this work cannot happen for free. And so it's either for the government to redirect funding to work around intellectual disabilities, or for the government to take the lead on sourcing external funding for work around intellectual disabilities. I think we need a truly progressive workplace policy for the employment of persons with intellectual disabilities. And I think Ms. Brown said it really well, is that people, a lot of times people have, you know, goodwill and they're coming from a place of good intentions. They might lack knowledge and they might lack awareness and they might lack clarity. And I think that having a workplace policy that says people with intellectual disabilities have a right to work, and this is how we're going to accommodate them in workspaces, and this is what you need to do as an employer to be responsible to the community of people with intellectual disabilities, that could help. Training, I mean, I feel like me and Safrid up on the same wavelength, but the training, my love, a lot of people need training. People need to know what to do and how to do it. And I think that the government funding that training, the government allowing us to train like all public sector employees is something that's useful. A lot of times it's also about how we hold people accountable. When you have a law or a policy, it tells you what recourse is there, or what recourse there is if something goes wrong. And so I think we really need to start using what we have and implementing more so people have somewhere to go when something goes wrong. And the final thing for me is that it always comes back to community. I think community work is important. So we need to include community-based groups in these conversations. I think that we have a very fertile environment when it comes on to community groups in Jamaica. So you have the police, youth club, and all of them type of something there. Bring them in, train them, go to their meetings, train them. All of these groups that, you know, the government would kind of advocate for their existence because of the support that they lend to communities and how they support youth in communities and whatever. Bring them in and use them as a starting point for having these conversations around inclusion of people with intellectual disabilities. But like, I will begin where I ended. The government has massive platforms with a massive reach where they're disseminating information. I don't just want to see information about people with intellectual disabilities on those platforms. I want to see people with intellectual disabilities on those platforms. And I don't just want to see them in the capacity of interviewee, which is important, but I want to see them speaking using their own voice, taking the lead on the conversation on these government platforms.
from just having persons with disabilities as beneficiaries. We want to have them as partners as well in the process. So I think that's very important, as you just noted, Ms. Moore. I was supposed to ask you about employment. No.
But before I go to employment, may I just extend on something that was said earlier? We speak about the government and what the government is doing. We, and the arm of the government having responsibility for persons with disabilities is the Ministry of Education. The Ministry of Education, in partnership with Health and Labor and Social Security. So there are 3 ministries, but the lead ministry is the Ministry of Education. And so they have a special education unit with responsibility for all areas of special needs and special educational needs. And so we need to remember that. And there are 8 strategic objectives of the Ministry of Education, and 3 of those speak specifically to persons with disabilities. What we're having now, we have re-engaged this new permanent secretary in how we look at what's happening to persons with intellectual disabilities. So I want to say that we have started. And what we want to do is to get the regional directors in all 6, and I think it's a 7th region now, engaged in what should be happening at that level, because we have schools across all the regions. So the work has started. It is a matter of training, and it's a matter of understanding what's happening. And they are funding. They are funding. It is what we do with what we get, and it is about training persons. So that's correct. So we need, as partners now, to come together and look at what are we doing on the ground based on understanding of needs and what should be happening. So unless you know, unless we tell you, we'll not know. Yes, they are doing something. So we need an understanding there, and to come together and have a discussion off air on what's happening, and so what we can do as advocates. And just to say lastly, that some persons will need a voice. Because one of the barriers for persons with intellectual disabilities is language and communication. And sometimes some will not be able to express themselves. Some will not be able to tell, I am feeling sad, or I like what you're doing, or don't like what you're doing. We need to understand what the needs are and to be able to assist them and to ensure that their needs are met.
Which is why we need training. I think that keeps coming up through each speaker.
And that is why every teacher's college must teach at least 3 modules in special education, of which intellectual disabilities is a part. So every teacher coming out of teacher's college must be exposed to what disability issues are.
All right, that's good. I was going to ask about employment, but because Ms. Moore touched on it somewhat, I thought I would switch to another question. So we know that, for example, that the organization Jade was started by Mr. Randolph Lopez, and there were other persons, Ms. McFarlane earlier, and she noted that Digicel Foundation, one of their pillars is special needs. So, you know, whatever they take on, you expect that special needs will most likely be a part of it. Do you think we need to have something like that for other private sector organizations, where their foundations may need to say, well, these are the different, it doesn't have to be special needs, but just generally speaking, that these are the pillars that we stand on, and, you know, whatever initiative we take on, most likely that these things will be targeted. Do you think we need that kind of targeted approach?
I mean, I think that it's a number of different approaches. So yes, I mean, I think that definitely is a good approach. But I do think the issue is, you know, inclusion really must be just about that ecosystem for anybody to participate in what it is you're doing. So if as an employer, as a business that provides services, as a government that delivers services, your policies must allow anybody within the society to participate. And I feel that when we say that it is special needs, we allow the sort of larger part of society to feel, well, it's a sort of optional, right? Oh, do you want? that it's sort of optional, or that it's not our area of focus. But our area of focus should really just be one of overall inclusion. And if in that approach and that philosophy around inclusion for everybody, we identify that we don't have the policies in place for a specific group, or that we haven't factored in the needs of a specific group, then that should be something that companies look at. But as a philosophy, we should all be looking to have a system of inclusion, full stop. Yeah.
May I add to this inclusion argument and discussion? When we talk about inclusion, we need to be careful, because people are advocating, or in other jurisdictions, persons advocate for including persons with disabilities, regardless of the level of disability, in schools, in society, which in our society will not work, because the provisions are made elsewhere. For us, if you include a child who is blind or deaf or having severe intellectual disabilities in one of our specific primary classrooms, now their needs will not be met. They will be, some form of inclusion is the highest or largest or biggest form of exclusion. You put them somewhere where they are not learning anything, they don't understand anything, and they are not benefiting. So when we speak inclusion, we need to be specific as to what it is we really want, because we do not want inclusion across the board. So it is inclusion because it is to be the least restrictive environment. It means it is the environment that is going to prevent you or enable you to learn your maximum. And if it is not happening, that's not the least restrictive environment. So we need to look carefully at what we ask for when we talk about inclusion. We must be able to make those provisions.
Understood.
And just respond to that. So maybe this is the technicalities of working within this space that you work in. I'm not quite sure I agree overall. I do think that when we talk about inclusion, within talking about inclusion, you understand what are the barriers to inclusion and what the barriers to inclusion are for different groups. So if you have an overall philosophy around inclusion, you therefore always look at what are the barriers, what are the inhibitors, what are the drawbacks, what are the things that will not allow specific groups to thrive, and you identify those and you address those. So we're not talking about inclusion meaning that it's the same approach for everybody. Inclusion, again, is about understanding the needs of the different groups and therefore putting those things in place. So I think from that perspective, we have to acknowledge the philosophy is the first stopping point, the first point, and then the next one are what are the barriers. So once your advocates come and talk about people with intellectual disabilities, then if the philosophy is one of inclusion, you say, okay, well, what are the barriers? What are the needs? What are the requirements? How do we put the correct policy in place for work? How do we do the correct policy for customer service? How do we make sure that we put all these things in place? So I think that's really where it's coming from, but maybe it's more the kind of difference in the technicalities of working directly in the space versus the overall idea around what I was referring to.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I think we're now on the same page. I love it. So just before the electricity went out here, we were discussing inclusion and the philosophy of inclusion. So I wanted to ask Dr. Reed if we need more champions in the space.
Sure. We need champions like you, Digicel, Miss Moore.
Miss Brown.
I'm getting all the names wrong today.
You have so much to pay at the end of the day.
Thank you. I'm getting all the names wrong. So if I were to be charged today, I would have to pay out a lot. We need voices around. Some of us are old. We have been in there a long time. And so we need new champions. So people will be listening to you. Oh, this is a new voice. Being at the Ministry of Education, I've heard people saying, oh, we have not heard. It's the first I'm hearing about intellectual disability, and you're an education officer. So we need to be doing something about this. We need new champions, new voices, and we need our student over there, I won't call her name, lest I call it wrong, Chanel. We need Chanel, more of Chanels to be speaking up so that, yes, the championing for a cause.
All right, so audience joining us online, you hear we need more champions. So if you're definitely an ally to the cause, we'd love to have you get involved. So we're going to go to Ms. Moore with our final question. well, at least final prepared question, because we will have a Q&A section for a few minutes after this, which talks about social service systems. How it is that we can promote greater awareness among the social service systems, such as the justice system, transportation, etc., through the advocacy that you've been speaking about.
Thanks for that. I think it's going to come back to me and Safri beating Hartage's training. Advocacy, I've seen other groups who are socially excluded use advocacy, self-advocacy, as a way to improve these systems, make these systems more accessible for them. I've seen young people use it. I've seen LGBT persons use it. I've seen persons living with HIV use it. And in general, what happens is not just exposure to the issues, but exposure to the people who the issues are affecting. And that type of interface to say, this is what my experience is like interacting with your system. These are the challenges that I have interacting with your system. And here is how you could make your system more accessible to me. And as Dr. Reed said, yes, sometimes, as you know, the thing of giving voice to the voiceless, sometimes somebody will have to speak for someone, but it's important that we function in those capacities where necessary. On a very granular level, a lot of times these agencies will have ongoing training that happens. And I think if we can get training around offering services to persons with intellectual disabilities as a standard part of those trainings, it could help. At this point, some of the training is happening, but we probably need more. And across the board, training is a challenge that we face. To get enough people to do the trainings, to find the time that for the employees to complete the training, and not just the training, but the follow-up. So it's not a one and done thing. We train you one time and then we move on. How do we keep that training going? Another approach is making the training a standard part of the orientation for new staff that comes in, right? So increasing exposure to the issues affecting persons living with intellectual disabilities and to people living with intellectual disabilities themselves, and then ensuring that we have redress systems that are there. And that's not just about awareness, that's about doing something with the awareness now. So we've trained you and you're aware and you know what to do. So somebody comes in and they receive terrible treatment. Where do we go from here? The next step for us after that treatment is for the person with the intellectual disability to know where they can report and what type of support they can receive. And then for the person who, did the wrong thing, to understand what steps will be taken. There's something that I want to point out here though. We have to walk that line between people seeking redress and people becoming extra stigmatized very carefully. And here's what I mean. If people, and it's happened before, like with LGBT people using the redress systems at health centers, they face this challenge because now some healthcare workers treat LGBT persons as a problem because, una go report we, una go make problems for we, and so I go stay far from you because I don't want nobody report me, I don't want nobody report we. And for persons with intellectual disabilities, because they are also a group that is stigmatized, when they start to use the redress system, as the number of reports increase, there is that potential backlash, and we have to figure out how to mitigate against that and how to navigate that so we don't create yet another barrier for persons with intellectual disabilities when they are utilizing these type of social justice, social support systems, right? But before we do all of that, I think the people who are working in these systems need to understand that persons with intellectual disabilities are entitled to a space in daily life. They should be there. They should be in your office. They should be accessing services. You're not doing a favor to them by offering them service that is welcoming and that meets their needs and that equitable meets their needs. They are supposed to be there. And so whatever you have to do to ensure that they have a positive experience is a part of your job, because we have said it. The statement is that persons with disabilities have a right to take part in all activities in a country, work, play, and do business. And this is coming from the website that houses the Disabilities Act, right? So I think it's about that. It's about increasing exposure. It's about upping the training. It's about building in a system where people can seek justice. It's about ensuring that using that system is safe, but on the broadest level, it's ensuring that we all understand that people with intellectual disabilities are entitled to a space in daily life, and our work is to ensure that they can enjoy that access that they deserve.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. Moore. And I think it takes me to this question about technology. How it is that we can use technology to increase the visibility and create more access, you know, as we create inclusive communities for persons, you know, with intellectual disabilities, and also across the board. How can we use technology in the private sector to do that?
You know, so first of all, I just want to endorse everything that Carla just said. I think it's really, really important. And one of the areas that we at Project Star have identified as a key area is treatment of communities in terms of how they access services. And recognizing also that just because you're providing a service doesn't mean that people have access to it. And so we have to recognize that, and very often we try and say, yes, man, it's provided, they can access it. And we know there are many different barriers to them being able to access it, one of which is how they're treated, okay? In terms of technology, you know, obviously there's a lot of sort of AI technology out there and these sorts of things that can support, but I think that we have to use it very much as a tool for information, for toolkits, resource sharing, information sharing, I think is an important component of it, but also how agencies provide services. And so very often we live in a society with limited resources, and having access to knowledge and information, not necessarily because you've had the training in all the specific points, but that you can access it easily. Right. And technology being a tool for that, I think, is an important part. If you're dealt with, you know, if you have a specific situation where you really just don't understand what's happening, you know, being able to use technology to kind of approach that and find the solutions, I think, is an important component. But, you know, overall, I mean, I think it's a difficult area because I think that people with intellectual disabilities do require the sort of humanity of people and a specific understanding and specific relationship building. There is a social enterprise, it's a Silicon Valley kind of tech-based social enterprise in the US called Benetech. And you know, Benetech is based right there in Palo Alto, and it specifically delivers technological solutions for good, for people who have learning difficulties, for people who need access to health services and all these sorts of things. You know, I think it's important that we work with technology companies that specifically focus in this area. And see if we can develop partnerships, both locally and internationally, to identify what the solutions are. One of the things is, you know, I was chair with CVSS for quite a few years. One of the things we identified was our member organizations, such as a JID, not pointing out JID, but our member organizations, because resourcing is so limited, very often things that had to do with software development, using technology to provide solutions, was very much not factored in. Software is very expensive, it's very specialist, you need an IT solutions consultant to help you understand what you even need to do, and so on and so forth. I think this is where, you know, private sector can support the work in just terms of helping to identify that kind of expertise. I don't know many NGOs that have that level of expertise. I never was involved in one, but really providing that level of expertise. So again, being solutions oriented, it was mentioned earlier, how do we solve the problem with a solution? And identifying, well, first of all, what's out there? How can we support? How can we get the software? And then once you get software, how do you pay licensing? And all of these are the realities. I'm not an expert on software, but I know that private sector would definitely look to partner and support in this area to be able to engage the work that you're doing so you can do it more effectively. I don't know if that answers the question.
I think it does. I think it does.
I have a great IT software solutions guy who could have answered the question if you were here.
I think the answer prepares us for the next step, which is that we need to have the partnerships to support technology that we want to develop in our respective organizations. And it's important as well that the technology doesn't create another barrier, because, you know, sometimes we rely on tech, but tech actually excludes in some cases. So you don't have the Wi-Fi in these homes, you don't have the phone or the tablet or the laptop. So you think you're using tech to make it more inclusive, but you're actually excluding the persons you're targeting. So that's very important. I remember during COVID-19, when I was the president of the guild at UA, and we were supposed to go online because, you know, there were school closures. And everyone was thinking about, okay, we're going to go online fully and we're going to keep classes there so we can, you know, reduce learning loss. One of the questions I had to ask them was, what about the students with special needs? How are we going to ensure that these platforms are developed in a way where they can access and continue to have a meaningful education experience? And that's something that we had to look at really closely, and then to, as you said, work with different partners to actually deliver the online learning in a way that they could benefit from. So I think we have to ensure that while we're putting in these different solutions, we're not excluding. And as you rightfully said, you can have the service, but persons can't actually access. So that's very important. Steve, you wanted to add something, Dr.
Yes,
Reed.
I wanted to say that during COVID, many of our students were left behind. Some were just not included in classes because they were unable to access.
Online, right?
Yes. There, in many instances, one phone in the home, and it is the other children who are using it, so students with ID were not able to use it. And in some instances, the teachers were unable to get their attention. They had to resort to face-to-face, even during COVID. And the students who needed it the most were the ones who were excluded. And when tablets were being delivered or issued through the Ministry of Education, our students were excluded because they were told that, oh, you can't use it. So what we need right now, training, training for the use of technology, right, to be able to use simple applications, so that, because we have a legacy, we are not going anywhere, we're still going to be doing some online learning. So it's training at the home level, school level, and the teachers themselves didn't understand what to do in doing the Zoom and the Ministry of Education classrooms, so our students were not a part. We are still to assess what took place during COVID and the effects it had on our students, because many of them were not in school for the 3 years. So that's a big problem.
Learning loss right there. So that really highlights what we're saying in terms of we have to ensure the technology really creates the inclusive space that we want and it doesn't actually exclude. It's very important. Dr. Reed, you'll be having the final say in terms of the prepared questions, but just before I ask you that question, I'm inviting persons online to send your questions, type them up, send them in the chat, because we will allow the panelists here to answer them, as well as our audience here in case you have any questions as well. You're going to be given a chance to ask those questions. So the question I have for you, Dr. Reed, is, Jade, with its mission and vision to help families to facilitate the long-term care of adults and those aging with ID. So how will Jade, through its mission and vision, help families to support children and those aging with intellectual disabilities?
Well, we have always thought of beginning at the beginning. When they start is when we start preparing them for exit. So we are aware of their needs, and so in coming in at the early stage, we start preparing them for the world of work. We also have support for our parents through PROP. Our social worker works with our parents to guide them through the process, engaging them on a monthly and weekly basis, having sessions, and also getting them to understand what's available, what they can access for their students in preparing the students. So from entry, they're assessed, we look at their needs, we look at what the requirements are, and how are they fitting in. And there are times when students may exceed what we expect of them, so we also try to get them elsewhere so that they can become greater experts at what they're doing. So the mission, the vision, what we are about is getting our students to to achieve their highest potential and to take their places in society. And this is why we're having this forum, looking at all the various areas, their own advocacy, our advocacy on their behalf, our telling the stories and getting others to come on board and to share with us, and for us to get partners to be a part of it, and to get our government to support and to fund education for our students to take them to the next step, from entry to school to exit into the workplace. And so we have a transition department as well that hold their hands through involvement in the world of work while they are there at the pre-vocational setting, taking them through from school to work, the experience, then they will transition to the world of work. And that is why we are seeing the results today.
All right. I love that you mentioned the transition unit that you have, because Katisha Sutherland, she's joining us online. Hello, Katisha. She's asking about the opportunity, well, rather there's a job placement after the 6 months program. So after they've gone through the transition, is there a job placement program in place? As well as Talitha Wilson is asking about if there's the potential for a partnership with Heart Trust NSTA to get these persons certified in their respective skills.
Sure, we have. And if you ask Mrs. McCoy and Mr. Ferguson, they will tell you, we do have a program, and the person's transition to the world of work, the experience is given, and they are placed.
And they're placed.
Job placement takes place.
Right. And what about that Heart Trust NSTA?
Heart Trust, yes. The partnership with Heart Trust is in place, is intact, and they are training our students.
Very good,
for
very
placement. Go ahead.
Go ahead. We could, yes, get her a mic, please. So she can explain a little bit more about the Heart Trust NSTA program.
Although we do have a partnership with Heart Trust NSTA, what we seek to do now is to expand the program offerings, because, you know, students are not necessarily interested in a particular skill. So if you extend the offerings, then you have more persons engaged in the certification, the actual training and certification for those skills.
I agree with that. I agree with that. We want to ensure that persons with different, as you said, interests and abilities are also catered to. So this isn't a question, it's a comment, but I'd love for Ms. Moore to respond to it. Rich Richards, hello, Rich Richards joining us online. He's talking about the shame for people who are high functioning, who try to pass as normal. And so in terms of self-advocacy, you know, they don't really want to come onto these different platforms and to say that I identify as having ID, because they want to pass as much as possible as high functioning. Do you have any comments to that?
Yeah, that's a great comment. I think that living with a characteristic that is not accepted in society is very complicated, and people have to go on their own individual journey. I know that there are some people who, because they're able to function in a way that society deems acceptable, people don't think that they have an intellectual disability. If you are interested in the work, then identify as an ally and do the work. Visibility is not the only way for us to change hearts and minds. Visibility is not the only way we can do advocacy. It is significant to advocacy. It is a very useful form of advocacy. But if you are doing the work of promoting the rights of the community, the needs of the community, and the interests of the community, but you're not telling people that you're a member of the community, that's fine. Because guess what? This is a very sensitive and political issue and all these types of things, right? Unfortunately, there are some doors that you will be able to get into if you don't say you have an intellectual disability. That is the unfortunate truth. There are some doors that are going to close to you once people know you have an intellectual disability. They will begin to gravely underestimate you the moment you come out and say that. And so if you and your intellectual disability can get into that room and start causing some ruckus in there, go in at the row. If you get to a point further in your life where you feel comfortable admitting that you have an intellectual disability and your advocacy shapes itself in that way, then that's also good. This is a tactic that people from many backgrounds have used. If you want to identify with the community as an ally and you're doing that type of change work, then you're doing that type of change work, and that's what matters. But I'm very glad that you raised that, because it's something that people really do struggle with, because people's response to you change the moment they know that you belong to a particular group. So you don't have to come out as having an ID in order to be useful to the community as an advocate.
Though,
Sure.
if you are trying to pass not having an intellectual disability, chances are you don't have. It means that you may definitely not have an intellectual disability. And the fact is, though, that many persons with intellectual disabilities are in the regular system, because we cater to students with moderate to severe and profound. So mild persons are really in the regular school system, unidentified. They are not usually identified. But what happens is that sometimes, for the sake of placing somebody, you place a high functioning, which is not the problem of the person, but the problem of the psychologist who took that decision. So very often those persons should not have been labeled and should not have been in the system. So more than half of persons with intellectual disabilities are not in a special school. So we're having this challenge, and this is what is affecting the Ministry of Education's averages. Because they're having their pathways for students who are failing. They don't know why they're failing, because the students are not assessed to determine their levels of functioning, to determine what's wrong, so you can make provisions for them to be on the right path. That's a challenge for us. So you have persons out there who may have a learning disability posing as having an intellectual disability, and at the same time you have an intellectual disability, but you don't belong in a special system.
Understood. I love that clarification. I think a lot of us are shaking our heads to note that clarification. Do we have any questions from the audience as we begin to wrap up our panel? Yes, we'd love to have a mic brought to you. Yes, so the online audience can engage.
Okay, so good afternoon, right? I have two questions. I've been working in the field of persons with disability over the years, right? And what I find is that placing persons with intellectual disability in employment, fine. But what I find too is that the employer do not believe in this, that they can carry out the activity. So, because I have a person that I am passionate as it relates to persons with intellectual disability, because I have seen where the person with intellectual disability, you give them clear instruction and they carry the activity, and then you have the able-bodied person who align themselves the same job and they do not carry out the activity that they need to do. And so when it comes on to evaluation of the work, the person with intellectual disability is, because they already know that they have a disability, they create this scenario as if it's the person with the intellectual disability not carrying out the activity. You get me? And so they are always being treated unfairly, right? So that is one. Number two, I find that even within the sector, disability sector, I find that persons who are working in the disability sector do not believe that the person with this intellectual disability can go out and function. And sometimes an opportunity might come up and you made a recommendation that, and you're turned down. And so for that, so if it is that we're going to behave in like that, we will forever be sitting in this room talking the same thing over. So I'm saying that, so within everything that you do, within the sector, I'm just thinking that we need probably to look back, how we do things, what are the opportunities out there, what are the skills set, and be honest and channel the employers or the individual to the opportunity that exists. If we don't look at ourselves or maybe, and I don't want to say the person, because as Dr. Reed said, we're all getting older, we're going to move on. And so the next step, but to just that, we need to clear that pathway. So to know that within the society, we have persons with intellectual disability and create the opportunity that they can exist, they can work just like anybody else and even more. You get me? So that's a concern to me. Those are the two major concerns that I have. And also to work with the family, because the family needs to be a part of it as well.
All right, Dr. Reed, do you have anything to add? But in a way, I'd like to say that I think you actually responded to your own question, you know. But I don't know if you have, there's another question here, all right. And I think it's great. I will be ending on this note with a question from a young person.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So I have two questions. One of my concern is why person with disability and higher functioning people, like normal people, why them can't live good, miss?
Why they can't live good?
Yeah.
That's a good question. And your second one?
And the second one is why the higher functioning person always try to look down on the person with disability.
Great questions. Who would like to take the questions? Dr. Reed?
That's a barrier that we're trying to break down. It's a matter of getting persons to understand your needs, that you are persons first, and that you have a challenge, and that we are all equal. You see, you talk about higher functioning persons, you are functioning higher than them in your thoughts. Because what we need to understand that people are people with challenges. All of us have challenges, so we should not be discriminating.
Yes, but you know, sometimes even bully the person with disability.
Yes.
Sometimes I wonder why that happens.
Lack of understanding.
Me have literally do it every day.
Yes. But they're the ones who are handicapped, not you.
And you know, me usually feel that way about myself. Like, people usually tell me, as a cast right here. Okay, so I usually feel that way about myself because my left hand right here, it's not 100, sir. So people usually fast with me, call me handicap, call me all sort of name, until one day I just get over it. But the thing is, I always ask, so I always ask myself, every morning I ask myself, why there is cyberbullying between higher functioning person with disability, why fighting on them? So I always ask myself them type of question.
Yeah, I think it's hard for me to explain why they do, but what I'm clear of is the resilience that is out there is your resilience, right? The truth is you are the one. You are the one that is more resilient. Okay. You are the one that is more resilient. You are the one that is actually showing more propensity to be able to be flexible and to be able to adapt. So the truth is that I think that what you show is your ability to really adapt to situations where others maybe do not have the adaptability that you have. And when they treat you like that, it's because they're not really able to adapt to it. But give it time, build relationships with them. I think you're spectacular. Yes. And so I think once they get to know you, they would think so too. Okay? But this is the job of self-advocates, advocates, partners, friends, family, and the society is to make sure that that enabling environment is one where everybody recognizes how incredible you are.
So your level of thinking is higher than the person's you are thinking should be higher than yours. Yes, it's high. It's at a very high level. So kudos to you. Wonderful.
All right, I think we're going to have a final say from, what's her name?
Stacy.
All right, Stacy.
All right. The question is disability. What is that disability? What is disability? Yes.
Sometimes it's something that happens during pregnancy. And something can also go wrong in the environment. So we have environmental factors. I will just call them things that happen in the environment. Stacy? Something that your mother might have engaged in, some poisoning, something, smoking, drugs, some of those things can cause it, right? A baby who is underweight, weighs less than 5 pounds at birth. If you have multiple pregnancies, all those things can cause problems. And there are also genetic problems. Let me break that down. It's something that happens while the baby is developing in the womb. And during the division of cells, something can go wrong. And then you have persons with Down syndrome. Sometimes there is an extra chromosome. I am gone there, but there is something extra in the development that cause persons that look like they have one father, whether you are Chinese, black, or Indian. That's called Down syndrome. Something gone wrong with the 21st pair of genes. All right?
Sorry, there's a group that, again, a social enterprise that I worked very closely with called Deaf Can Coffee. Anybody know Deaf Can Coffee? Yeah. Wonderful, right? They're a wonderful group. And they are young people who are deaf, who have set up their own company as baristas. They make coffee. They don't say they're disabled, they say they're differently abled. And the truth is that you are differently abled, right? But you're very abled, yes. Okay? And so I think that that's important for us to recognize that it takes everybody to be part of this society, not just one type.
Thank you. So my question, comment, or whatever is floating in my head is that I heard most of the conversation being pitched to persons of school age, most of it. But you have people who are differently abled or intellectually challenged at different past school age, over 21. My own sister is 37, looks 12, and she has intellectual disability. And I know that there are some systems in place, but we need more awareness in terms of, I know something was being said about Heart Trust NTA, but in terms of employment, and that is where advocacy is definitely going to have to come in terms of employment. My own conscience has been stirring since March, Intellectual Disabilities Awareness Month, when I look at it and I said to myself, I really need to invest more in my sister's, to make her an entrepreneur in jewelry making, because just looking at what she has done. So we talk about advocacy coming from home, advocacy, self-advocacy, and so on. But I think focus now needs to go beyond the schoolroom in terms of persons with intellectual disability, beyond school age, and how we can capture them and include them in society for their own empowerment, etc., etc., etc.
Can I just add, I think that you need this potential partnership, if you haven't done so already, with Hermage. So Hermage is the Human Resource Management Association of Jamaica, which is made up of HR practitioners from all over the island. And so working with them to help see if they would do education, because very often employers may reach out to people living with intellectual disability if they understood exactly what the jobs were, the kind of jobs, the kind of tasks that they would excel at. Because we know that people living with intellectual disabilities can thrive and excel in the workplace. But again, it goes back to advocacy and education, advocacy and information. information. And so I think if we do that work through Hermage, try and start getting the messaging out, I think that you would find that you would get some good gains that way, because employment matters, right?
All right. All right, this is going to be your final comment or question from the floor. Introduce yourself and your question. Thank you.
Hi, good day, everyone. I'm Ms. Reese, representing Randolph Lopez School of Hope for special needs person, multiple disability, also partner with Jade. My question borders almost all the points that have been raised right here, and it pitches very close to the last one made over there by my fellow participants. So we have a lot of conversations about our special need persons within the educational context in terms of age, range, and chronology, but there's not much about the adult's life. We talk about transition, but the transition seems like it almost drops them off from out of school, and then there's not much continuation. Transition must include sustenance. So I think we need to be pitching as to where we're going with sustenance for special education. I think that's the next level for our country. In particular, one of my pet peeve, one of my passion areas is the special needs, the ID person's whole life. So we talk about employment. What about the desires? What about the desire for family? What about the desire for love? What about family planning? What about the very conversation we just had with the young lady, that not everybody with a special need is a genetic case, so they can have a healthy, normal child who can come to help to take care of them, who can come to help to add value to their life, to advocate in ways because they're intimately connected. We need to start having not only those conversations, but making those plans.
Full life, whole life. I'm going to ask Ms. Moore to respond to this.
You know, I don't even know how to respond to that point other than to pick it up because it's true. And that's why one of the questions I ask when it comes down to self-advocacy is, what does your most fulfilling life feel like? Because I think very often when we think of persons living with disabilities, we think, oh, how can you survive? Which is important. It's very important. But I think it's essential for us to think more broadly about the life experience of a person living with a disability than just their survival. How can they enjoy their lives? And so I think if it doesn't exist already, although Jade probably is having these conversations, it's really like getting that conversation together, asking them that question so they can start thinking in that way, and getting that conversation together and then actively integrating that into our advocacy. The challenge is that most of us are not accustomed to answering a question like that. Most of us, regardless of our ability status, do not ask ourselves the question, what does your most fulfilling life look like? What are the best job you can have? By what age you go buy your house? But what does joy, what do relationships, what does, pleasure, your partner, all of those things, we don't focus on those things. And in that way, I think disability justice work has the opportunity to lead us into some new waters in terms of taking a whole life approach even to ourselves. And for me, I think it would be fantastic for people living with disabilities to have a space there, but also lead us in some new directions, because we are limited in our thinkings in many ways. A lot of us are ableist in our thinking in many ways. And I think this type of advocacy work has the potential to open up a lot of space, not only for persons living with disabilities, for us as a community.
Thank you so much, Ms. Moore. I think the closing line would be that we don't just need to support persons with disabilities to survive, but for them to thrive and to live their best lives. So I think that's a good way to wrap up, all that we have said. And how can we achieve this? Through leadership, advocacy, and partnerships. Thank you so much, Dr. Joanne Reed, President, Council of Management, Jamaica Association on Intellectual Disabilities. For advocacy, we had Ms. Carla Moore, advocate and lecturer at the University of the West Indies. And for partnerships, Ms. Safra Brown, project director for Project Star, private sector organization of Jamaica. Ladies and gentlemen, that was our esteemed panel. Please give them a round of applause. And they're clapping each other, and they're clapping themselves, and we're clapping our temporary panelist who was with us earlier as well, Miss Chanel Williams. Of course, we have to big you up. So, ladies and gentlemen, they say all good things must come to an end, or at least must pause, right? All good things must pause. It will not come to an end because it's not a... I love that. All good things must continue. Right. So, because of course, it's not a moment, it's a movement, right? We're moving forward with these ideas, with these solutions beyond this event. Ladies and gentlemen, this was our Jamaica Association Intellectual Disabilities Intellectual Disability Forum. This month of March, we would have been celebrating intellectual disability awareness, and today is the last day of the month of March, so today would have been the last day of our celebration. But even though the month is ended, as I just mentioned, we will carry the movement forward. This was in partnership with our long-established partner, Digicel Foundation, and of course, they would have been one of the key organizations to make this possible. Even though they were not here today, we also want to make mention of the Japan International Cooperation Agency, who is also a key partner in the work that Jade does, you know, in these communities, etc. So we also want to make mention of them and thank them despite their absence here today. We also want to, of course, pick up, as we would say in Jamaica, our Jade, Gavin Ferguson from Jade, Development Manager. Let's give him a round of applause, please, because I think he really pulled all of this together. And of course, Ms. Marilyn McCoy, Executive Director of Jade as well, and just the overall team for all that they have done. I also want to pick up the parents in the room who would have brought their children here today, and the teacher as well who brought her students. I think it's important that we have leaders in the space and would have been able to facilitate them, bringing them into the space so they can advocate and represent for themselves, which we have noted is very important. Ladies and gentlemen, it was my absolute pleasure hosting this morning's session. I'm looking forward to other engagements because as a youth advocate, I think it's important that while I'm out there advocating for young people across the board, I'm also ensuring that young people with disabilities are at the table, representing themselves. So I'm happy I was able to be engaged in this way, and I'm looking forward to other kind of engagement going forward. You said you wanted more champions. I am here committed to being a champion going forward in this matter and others. So thank you so much for that. Ladies and gentlemen, we wish you well. We'd say walk good. And if you're in your rooms or already in your houses, we'll say you can close the laptop and have a great day. Thank you all to my audience here in person. I think we have refreshments after this, so you'll be able to partake. And we wish you a great day. And thank you so much for making our Intellectual Disability Forum a success. Thank you.